Hello, hello,
Oh,
everybody. Welcome, welcome. I see all these faces, beautiful faces. Hello, welcome. My name is Graham Melendez, and I will be your MC slash moderator today for this amazing workshop about language access planning. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I work for the Immigrant Welcome Center as the Community Impact Coordinator. And just briefly, what IWC does, it provides support to immigrants across Indiana. We want to make sure that all of them are thriving, being a partner and advocate for all agencies who want to serve immigrants and be culturally sensitive. We are so happy to be here with Luna today as a partner. Luna has been an amazing partner for the Immigrant Welcome Center, especially during COVID-19, because it has been a great source of information and support for resources. Luna Language Services provides translation and interpretation services in general to organizations throughout the state of Indiana and across the county and the country. They work with a lot of local nonprofit organizations here in Indiana and have some insights to share to help more nonprofits plan for language support, resources. So just a few facts about why language access matters. At least 67.3 million people in the United States speak a foreign language at home. Here in Indianapolis, at least 13.5% of Marion County residents use a language other than English in their home. And it's very interesting to think about how you are going to engage with us today. Just so you know, there was a language planning document that was sent to you. If you haven't gotten it yet, no worries at all. Please email Tiffany at luna360.com and she will be happy to provide it for you. And any questions you have, feel free at any moment in the chat to please put them in there. Sometimes I can forget. I'll be like, oh, I want to send a question and then I'll forget. No, go ahead and put it in the chat box. We will get to them while they're fresh in your mind. And Marina will pause for questions throughout our event. And speaking of the fabulous Maria Hadjuana Waters, she is the president of Luna Language Services, and she has dedicated 20 years of her career and academic interests advocating for the civic, political, and cultural rights of communities facing discrimination. Mari has a background in legal work and has become Luna's subject matter expert in Title VI compliance and writing formal language access plans for organizations that may receive an audit. For those of you who may be unaware, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin in programs and activities receiving federal financial assistance. Language is often considered a proxy for national origin. So to enforce the prohibition against national origin discrimination under Title VI, President Clinton put a directive in place that requires federal agencies and recipients of federal financial assistance to take reasonable steps to ensure meaningful access to LEP beneficiaries of federally funded programs and activities. Many times, this includes creating a formal language access plan. And with that all said, once again, thank you for having me on today, Luna. I really appreciate the partnership. Mari, go ahead and take it away.
Oh, thank you, Graham. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, good. I'm so glad. And thank you so much for joining us, Graham. Our partnership with the Immigrant Welcome Center has been mutually beneficial. We service many of the same stakeholders, and so it's been an excellent partnership, and I'm very grateful to have you here, especially because the organization you work with is very relevant to the topic that we're talking about in terms of equity and access. And Graham, I hope that you don't mind. I'll be asking you some questions along the way, asking you to provide some real life examples. And please jump in if you think of something that could add to the discussion. So thank you. I also wanted to thank my ASL interpreter, Becca. If anyone has any problems with accessibility, please let us know in the chat and someone will be monitoring that. Please feel free to introduce yourself. We have people registered from literally all over the country, Hawaii, New York, here in Indiana. So it's really exciting. Please feel free. We can't network in person because we're not in person, but we have the benefit of networking virtually. Introduce yourself in the chat. If you have a LinkedIn profile you want to put along with your organization, that would be great. And from here on out, I'm really excited to talk to you about the tool of language access planning. Our goals today is to get you engaged, to learn about this powerful tool you can use to help your organization and serve your community. So without further ado, you may or may not be familiar with language access planning. Graham gave you a little bit of an introduction, and we're going to go over some of the terms that he mentioned. Graham, when I talk about a language access plan, what comes up for you? Or what would come up for you if you didn't, say, preview this workshop? Prior to learning about the workshop, what would you think it meant?
Thank you so much, Mari. It takes me back a few years ago when I didn't know anybody, or I didn't know anything about language access planning. And so I remember specifically in those moments, I thought that this is a way for agencies and people who have different languages that often are not spoken across in a major way to know what it means for them to go through that struggle, and for agencies to start being sensitive to those needs. And I thought about what an amazing opportunity it could be to think about all the brainstormed ways of how language access can possibly benefit somebody who doesn't speak English as well or doesn't know it in a capacity.
I think traditionally the tool has really been used to provide access for people seeking services, and really that's what it was intended to do. But more and more we see it as a planning tool, a strategic planning tool for organizations to understand what resources they may have, what resources they need to ask for. Graham, you yourself are multilingual. And, you know, when your organization hired you, or all the organizations that you've worked for, that was a huge asset to them. Knowing your multilingualism is, you know, that's part of a plan. So an organization can do an internal census to know what resources they have within and what resources they need to ask for. So to give you some context, Graham mentioned I do some consulting for organizations to do language access plans. Sometimes that's a government organization like an airport or a court system, a school, a hospital. And traditionally, that's who we would service. And those plans would take anywhere from 6 months to a year. They were very complicated, and they were driven by a compliance obligation. What I realized, and others realized as the years passed, is that this planning tool could be very useful for organizations that weren't so large, that weren't necessarily monitored by the Department of Justice. And that some smaller organizations also needed to have a plan, but it didn't need to be as complicated. So today, we're going to just get the tip of the iceberg. This workshop can be as long as a weekend. We're going to get you, my goals today is to get you to know what a plan is, to make a case for language access to the decision makers at your organization or to the funders that you're asking for resources from, and to get some practice. On the screen are some elements of the plan that we're going to be going over. Graham mentioned that I work for Luna Language Services. We're a language services agency. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary, and we started servicing the community due to Title VI requirements, which meant we started in the courts, in the hospitals, in schools, and we'll talk more about that later. But as the years passed and as our local demographics evolved and diversified, we've now been servicing, you know, every organization you can think of. All of you on this call probably have either accessed language services or are thinking about it. And at Luna, we offer that on-site interpreting. That's how we began. But now, of course, we offer interpreting services virtually through a call line, 24-hour call line. You can just call a number and get one of 200 languages on the phone. We have video interpreting and document translation. So those are our key services. You're looking at my beautiful staff, some of them. We also have a workforce of about 1,000 language providers across the region. I'm proud to say we have probably the most multilingual workforce in the area, which gives us a lot of experience in terms of managing those resources. Let's see. Before we go into every element of the plan, which we will, because you have a tool to do that, I want to talk about all the different ways this plan can be a tool for you. So this is a way, if you're thinking of being the author or championing a plan or asking your organization to create one, these are some of the arguments or the lines you'll want to use. You know, this is a language access plan. It is really a system that an organization can use to track. So it's a tracking tool to track the individuals that you are already serving or the individuals in your community that you wish to serve. It's certainly a budgeting tool. I would say it might be, that might be the greatest resource it is a budgeting tool. And I will right now shout out a workshop that's happening in 2 weeks. I won't be giving it, but my colleague Una Hartzell-Baird will be giving it. I believe, Graham, you'll be on that workshop as well. And it's the second step to this workshop, which will be looking specifically on how to budget language access services, specifically translation, because that's often where some organizations begin. And they'll be using real life budgets. So I wanted to shout that out. The language access tool is certainly a strategic tool. I recommend doing it in line with the strategic plan. It doesn't have to be that way, but it really helps because they complement each other so much in terms of helping organizations meet some of your goals, if your goals include equity and access, which many of our strategic plans do include those goals these days more and more. It's a marketing tool, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. If you have the language access plan, you're going to want to shout it to the mountaintops because it's something you should be proud of. It's you are on the innovative side of language access by having this, so that's a good thing. It's a compliance tool. So if you are one of the organizations that we will talk about that are required to have a plan, it is evidence of compliance. It's a safety and liability tool. So that means whether you're required to have a language access plan or not, if someone in your community feels like they weren't able to access your services or had a problem or an issue and brings that up, it's actually evidence again of your organization, doing their best to do the right thing. So that is a big selling point of how to do this. My background, I think Graham might have mentioned, I was a lawyer and I started in the area of discrimination complaints at an attorney general's office. And then I went on to practice human rights law before I became a businesswoman, which I never thought I would do, but it has completely informed our work at Luna. I want to hear from the audience in the form of the chat. I want to know from you, because there's not just one answer, there's a lot of answers. What do you think the source of duty and the source of policy that establishes language rights? And again, there's like a big laundry list. So let me see, Graham mentioned a couple of them. So we had some teasers, but what do people think, where does this duty arise from? And okay, so I'm just going to start shouting it out. Title VI, yes. Executive Order 13166. Someone has done their research and knows their homework. Excellent. That's extra brownie points. I don't always even get that right. What else? Where else might rights be established? Graham, do you have any ideas besides the Title VI?
Perhaps in the government?
From the government, from all arms of the government. We'll talk about it. And I want to hear at least one. Oh, in New York State, you have your own executive order in New York State. So that's a great point. So it could be local governments, it could be federal, local, even as dependent on certain organizational requirements. Let's get into it a little bit. And we won't have, this isn't a law school class, and so we won't have time to go on and on. But I do want to start first and foremost by reminding everyone that there's this inherent human right to express one's own culture and language. And we just don't want to forget that. That's not a right that's given to us. That's a right that we're born with, right? So that's where we start everything. That's where we begin. And from there, we have all branches of the government here in the US that have acknowledged a duty for organizations to provide access to their services, and not just to some people, but to all the people. And we've talked about the Civil Rights Act. Many of you are familiar with that. It's not just President Clinton who signed an executive order. Also, President Bush signed another executive order, which is significant. It comes from both sides of the political aisle. And then after that, we have Supreme Court cases, we have state cases, we have numerous legislative acts that have come and supported language access. One in particular recently is the Affordable Care Act. We know the ADA and many laws around anti-discrimination for people with disabilities. Those are also indicated. And so I want to say that if your organization is receiving federal funds or state funds, or if you apply for grants through those sources, you want to pay close attention to this workshop. If you don't, and that's for compliance reasons, if you don't receive those federal funds, you can really look at this tool as more of a strategic planning tool, a marketing tool, a tool to push you out into the community around like the purposes of access and equity. So who should have a plan and who must have a plan? This is really important. And this is a question we get asked a lot. Any organization that is serving or wants to serve individuals with limited English proficiency, and that includes the deaf community, must or should develop a plan. So organizations that receive federal funds, such as hospitals, it could be health plans, it could be organizations like I thought the Red Cross, but it's not the Red Cross because they do not receive government funding. But many organizations might, school-based organizations might receive funds, for example, through the Department of Education, the DMV, thank you. If you are one of, if you are one of those organizations, you can shout it out. There are lots and lots of examples. And I can answer some specific questions if you have doubts or wonder if your organization is in fact recipient of federal funding. Other accreditations can create this duty, if you will, especially in the healthcare industry. So it might not just be coming from the federal government. There could be no government funds, but you could still have a duty based on other obligations. So Graham, I'm going to ask you to step in again. I hope you don't mind. But from your perspective, why would your organization, the Immigrant Welcome Center, why would your organization need a language access plan?
That's a great question, Maddie. I think we went through this question a few years ago ourselves and thought, what is the reason for a language access plan? And the biggest thing we came up with had to do with the fact that there are pockets of populations that exist across Indianapolis that often don't have that access to information that really relates to their lives to help them be better. It's not priority for them. And so we thought about why would our organization jump into language access planning, it was because we want to make sure that we can serve, not just say we're serving everybody, but really, right, talk the talk, walk the walk, and really go ahead and make it so.
That is perfect. And there's a lot of organizations that find themselves in a position where they're using language services and they don't even really realize it. They have someone on staff that speaks Spanish and they've been throwing them in the front lines. They might be doing that more often. That person may not be able to get their job done because they're doing it so much. They're interpreting. They might have actually reached out to an agency to help with the translation of documents. But maybe it's just not formalized. And the problem then becomes is really about the budget, because it becomes a creeping budget item. We see this all the time. Our demographics are not going to slow down in terms of its diversity, right? We know that for a fact. So we know this budget item is going to probably get higher and higher. Why wouldn't we want to plan for that? So there are other, of course, reasons, and this is part of what I want to help you build the case for. Your organization is really, I mentioned this can be a marketing tool or a strategic planning tool. All of us, most of us want our organizations to grow and to service the maximum amount of stakeholders we can. So by expanding those services to more lingual groups, obviously you're going to reach new markets. Sometimes that's a challenge, but usually it's a welcome one. Not only is it reaching new markets, but it's expanding your brand. And many specific cultural groups we have found, and we've been told, are very loyal to brands if they know that they're welcome. And Graham, I'm sure you can attest to that, right? That some of the communities here in Indianapolis, like the Burmese community, or I know this about the deaf community, they might know a certain hospital always provides an interpreter. They might know that a certain social service organization has information in their own language that they'll be able to share. They're going to tell their people about that. They're going to bring their friends. And so it's really exponential opportunity to help your clients market your brand for you. I would say that the overall value of your organization increases, right, as your capacity to serve increases. And the value of each program, the value of each grant that you receive for that program. Of course, I don't even have to mention the benefits from increasing your cultural inclusion. I would say several years ago, we would spend a lot of time talking about this, and I hope we don't need to spend any time talking about it. It's obvious, and someone mentioned in the chat as well. This is about equity. This is about meeting the DEI goals and duties that our organizations have, and that we're becoming more and more vocal about. I talked about increasing safety and decreasing risk, and that, again, it's pretty obvious. If you're asking someone to come and participate in a program, you need to know about them and they need to know about you, right? They need to know what they're signing up for. And I think Graham and many of you can attest that it's in our nature to shake our heads and say yes if someone's talking to us. Does that mean we understand what they're saying? No, really no. And this might not even mean yes, in the culture of the person who you're interacting with. So we have to be careful. We have to assume actually that people's English is not as proficient as we might think. We have to assume that there will be questions that are not asked. So it's up to us to predict, to identify what is the most important information we need for everyone to know who wants to access our programs. I've mentioned compliance enough, and I won't beat our heads about it, but just know that if you are one of those organizations, you want that plan. And most importantly, it is just not cool to exclude people. And that goes back to our DEI goals. We don't want to be an organization that someone walks away from because they couldn't engage with us. You never want to be that organization, right? Especially with groups that are already feeling the extra challenge of marginalization. And so, yeah, this is the case. The good news is that we see a clear trend in inclusion inside of the mission and strategic plans of some funding organizations. And Graham, you and I talked recently about this, and I was just wondering if you could kind of talk about the interplay between language and the budget requests that you've made for your programs. You're trying to serve a very diverse community and raise money to serve those communities. And would you say that the acumen or the knowledge of your funders or willingness to serve all the languages that you want to reach is there, or are you having to work with them and educate them?
Thank you so much for that question, Maddie. I think it's so important for us to think about it. And it kind of goes back to that last point you made at number 7 about why it's important to include those communities that have often not been prioritized. And so it reminds me that whenever people give us a phone call, especially in the years before we had a language access plan, that there was a lot of fear in their voices because they didn't, and also it was hard for them to have the ask to say to us anything because they didn't speak the language. And so it's almost like you live in the US, therefore you have to speak English. That's the assumption. And so a lot of people try their best to speak the language, but it's so hard for them. And so I'll also add that when we have an interpreter on the phone and able to speak language, for example, I'm from Peru, and so I speak Spanish. Whenever I meet a Spanish speaking community member that calls and asks for help, there's almost like this level of just relief that happens in their voices. The stress goes away, they feel comfortable, and it's almost like knowing that I'm a person in their culture also makes them feel like they can trust us. Automatically, the fact that there's somebody who speaks like them, who may relate to their culture more than other people, it gives them that sense of this is a safe person. And then speaking about that safety, I definitely exhort organizations to think about the ways we've had to educate our funders to think about the decision tree, if you will, of what does it look like for you right now? Do your staff speak different languages? If so, who are you serving? Are you serving separate zip codes? Are you serving an entire county, wherever you are? And thinking about if you're trying to reach the populations that you want to, are you speaking their language? Not only are you meeting them where they are as far as services, but really the very basic thing, are you speaking the language they need? And if not, that's what we've asked our funders is when thinking about funding opportunities, think about how to include a line item for language line or language access planning, because it's so important to think about where these people are in their journeys and where you are. And it goes back to your earlier point, Maddie, of having that support in your staff to speak languages. At times, I know I've been in an organization beforehand where it was assumed since I spoke Spanish, I could just translate a document that comes in. And not only is it not okay for me to do that in some legal ways, but also it's inappropriate to ask a staff member whose job description was not translation to ask them of that. It's almost taking that advantage of your staff members who are bilingual or multilingual. So just thinking about in your line items as well, what does it look like to hire those people who speak languages and really paying them extra for that support, because language skills are an essential.
Yes, and thank you for bringing that up. And I think it's imperative and that we include that budget line, because some organizations will be expecting your programs to reach diverse communities. They might plan for certain languages like Spanish, It might already be built in their budget. But do they know that so here in Indianapolis, we have about 25,000 Burmese speakers, and a national funding agency may have no idea about that. Although they want us to be on the ground, reaching, that demographic, if you will, they might be surprised to know we need funding, not just for our Spanish speaking population, but for our Burmese speaking population, from some African languages that are becoming more and more prevalent. And unless we ask for it, they're not going to give it. So, keep asking. It's imperative. There was also a comment in the chat that I wanted to bring up, that we can't assume that our stakeholders out in the community, our multilingual stakeholders are literate in any language. And so it's important to know who you're trying to serve. And if you know that about your English speaking population and you're providing different access points, if you will, do that for your other community members too. That is what equity means. So thank you so much for that comment. We have already mentioned some key terms multiple times, and I'm going to quickly go through them. You heard LEP. It stands for limited proficiency in English, and it's sort of a dehumanizing term. So I don't love it, but it's the official government term that has been used in the laws. So we borrow it, and you'll see it. What I would request is that you make that your own. You define that yourself. And please do not forget to include the deaf community, the deaf and hard of hearing community. They are often forgotten in these plans, and they are often not included in this sort of assumption about LEP. Deaf and hard of hearing individuals may or may not use or know English. So they are, in fact, one of the stakeholders that would be important to reach. Meaningful access is a legal standard, okay? So you'll hear me talk about it and get used to it, because it sounds like it means what it sounds like, but it's a good word to use in your plan, because it's what you're attempting to do. You can't get it all right. You can't serve everyone. You can't serve everyone perfectly, but can someone access your program in a way that's meaningful and substantive to them? That's what you're trying to attain. Vital documents are also sort of what it sounds. You'll have a handout that speaks to it, but these are critical forms that someone would need to access to provide you with information about who they are, or the information they need to know about you and what they're signing up for. So those are a good place to start in terms of identifying what to translate or what to introduce in another language. So we talked a little bit about data, and we'll talk more about it right now. If we were in person, I would ask you to identify or take a guess of how many, thank you for someone just mentioned that a deaf individual, ASL is their first language, and English is their second. Yes, and we'll be talking more about the ASL and the deaf community coming up. But thank you so much for mentioning that, educating us. Graham, I assume you get this all the time as well. People are very, very surprised at how many languages are out there. And I love to ask people this question and try to list them. And usually they come up with 15 or 20 languages. It's hard to think of them all. And I think people on this call would come up with many more. But this is just an old, outdated list of the languages that are in my local community. And it's growing every day. And so what we're trying to do in our language access plan is identify the most frequently used languages, not all of them, but the most frequently used languages. So we can't do it all. I think Oprah said it. You can do it all, but you can't do it all at the same time. And that's why we plan things incrementally. I throw this slide up just to remind us that we've all heard we are a nation here in the US that was built upon immigrants, and it's true. And in some respects, we've gone backwards. These are some of the founding documents of the state of Indiana. And I don't know if you can see, but it's actually a multilingual document. This document was written in English and in French. So some of the early colonizers, of course, we had our native languages, but even the early colonizers here were putting out multilingual documents as some of our founding documents. And then we've sort of slipped backwards. We've been on a roller coaster in the US in terms of our demographics and our immigrant population. And there was a time where, back prior to the wars, where there were so many immigrants in this country, and our borders, as you know, shut down and policies became in place. It became harder and harder to kind of get in, yet people came, right? And people still are coming. And you can see, if you become familiar and look at the history, how we have this wave that about 20 years ago just started like gassing up big time. And those of us who've been working in the community during that time have seen it play out. We've seen the need for language services grow and grow and grow. This is a map of the US that demonstrates the rate of growth of immigrant populations, of foreign-born populations. That's the official term. I'm going to point out a 16%. You can see in Indiana, right in the middle, that's where we are. You can find your state. We have someone registered from Alaska. I don't know if they're on the call, but that's also a 16% growth. What's really interesting about this map is this is the rate of growth. So the rate of growth, Indiana is in the top 15 states now in terms of the rate of growth of our immigrant population in proportion to the population that was born here. So you see on the coast, it's really slow. Right in our neighboring Illinois, it's 1%. It's the states that have jobs, that have better housing prices, that are just friendlier to immigrants and refugees. There we see that population growing. Here in Indiana, we can see we have data that tells us what our most frequently used languages are. You also will have opportunity to find the data for your state, and I'm going to show you where you do that. This data it's golden, and it's the data you're going to use inside of your plan. It's the data you're going to share with your grant funders to ask for money to help service these populations. At Luna, we used to really be primarily a company that went in and serviced hospitals and courts, I mentioned, and now more and more we are servicing the workforce development of our country and the sort of the logistics community, the logistics companies, and all kinds of organizations that are hiring people that don't necessarily use English as their first language. This graph shows sort of the trends in the workforce age, which is 20 to about 65 or 70. And you don't need to really understand this graph, but I can tell you that the native born, which is what the government calls people that were born in the US, the workforce between 20 and 60 is shrunken. The growth of that workforce in proportion to the immigrants and foreign-born population that have come in. And what we've seen is that sector has grown and grown and grown and grown with no signs of stopping. So if your organization isn't already hiring from those communities, it's a great time to do it. Those folks do become resources for you. They do become links to the communities you're trying to serve. They become part of your plan is to increase your workforce. So it's a combination of internal resources and then external resources from agencies like Luna and others. I will pass out after the program some demographic information, both specific to Indiana and also national demographics. Graham rattled off some. These are data points, again, that you want to include in your plan, and you'll see where we do that. But I'm not going to go through this other to say that the projections, actually, I first came across this from the Immigrant Welcome Center data years ago, that by 2022, that's just a few months away, immigrants will account for 50% of our population growth. Okay, and in Indiana, by 2025, it was expected to be this majority minority flip. This is happening all across the country. I'm sure you're seeing it in your backyards as well. The time is ripe if you haven't started planning to plan now. And let us not forget our deaf and hard of hearing population. So many people don't include this in their planning, and it's estimated that 10% of our population is deaf or hard of hearing. Think about that. Wrap your head around that. And those are people that are either born deaf or become deaf. So that could include our older age population. But if you're not including that group in your plan, that is a massive amount of people that you're missing out, that you're losing. And it was mentioned in the chat, and I'll mention it as well. There cannot be an assumption that just because someone is deaf and knows American Sign Language, that they also use English. It is vital that certain information is passed on to them in their own language. And I will tell you that there are additional legal requirements to do so. We all know about the ADA, but most people are more familiar with the physical accommodations that organizations need to make. The access accommodations are really there. In fact, are just as important, of course. So please let this be an opportunity to do a check. Are we doing enough to reach out to that community and include them? Remember, you can use data to make that argument. This is just our deaf and hard of hearing population by county in Indiana. This is actually a little out of date. You can see it's from the last census. But when people say, I just don't have the funding, my boss doesn't want to cover this cost for our sign language interpreter. And I say, well, show them the data, go into the data, show them that the people are out there. It will help. Data speaks, data moves mountains. So let's just take like a stretch. And then, yes, thank you. And we are going to spend the remainder of the presentation just kind of quickly going into the plan. You have a guide which walks you step by step through a very simplified language access plan. Let me change my screen. I'm not always the best at doing this, but I think I can do it. All right. Do you all see a language access planning guide?
Yes.
Yes, I did it. Okay.
You got it.
Now's the time I can shout out Exodus Refugee. It's an organization that we work very closely with, and the Immigrant Welcome Center does. It's our refugee resettlement organization here in Indiana. And at Luna, we not only service many of their clients out in the community, we actually recruit them quite frequently to be part of our workforce. So Exodus was kind enough to let us use them as an example, and shared some of their own language access plans so I could use real life data and examples for you. I'm going to sort of run through this quickly. Your version will look different than my version, so don't worry about that. We've already discussed what a language access plan is. You're seeing that right now. We know who should have a plan, all organizations, but not necessarily the same plan, and not necessarily for compliance reasons, but some should. And that goes to if it's mandatory or not. That has to do with federal or state funding. And we talked some key reasons beyond compliance. That's the case for. There is something called a 4-part test, which we can ignore a bit right now. If you are one of those organizations that fall into that mandatory group, I would welcome you reaching out to me, and I can give you some additional information about the 4-part test. It's the test that the Department of Justice will use to determine how much access do you, how many resources do you need to throw at it? How much money do you need to put towards these efforts? And I will give you some resources to look at that yourself. Thank you for the link to the Exodus Refugee Immigration website, Tiffany. I appreciate that. And thank you for putting my email out there. So this is when you can get started with practice. The elements of the plan. And again, I'm going to use Exodus as an example. You start this by just filling out your form. This is literally, I'm going to read this out loud. To clarify a bit, the deaf community and the hard of hearing communities are two separate communities. Thank you for saying that. Usually those that are hard of hearing depend on captioning and do not use ASL because they may not have learned ASL. And thank you so much. They might have become hard of hearing later in life. So there are different accessibility tools to use for those two distinct communities. The deaf blind community, I think, also considers itself another unique community with their own unique set of needs. So that's another one to add to the list. So when you look at your own organization, it's just a matter of identifying yourselves and really what type of organization you are. Most on this call are probably not-for-profits. The legal background, this is something everyone will put in, whether you are required or not. It just shows everyone what the legal requirement is for this important plan. The purpose of your language access plan. It's effective communication, okay? And we talked about this, is to provide people with that meaningful access to reach your programs. And so Exodus identified that it was critical for them to provide the type of care and services to their stakeholders. Now, Exodus services people specifically, most of them, the vast majority of them do not have English, high English proficiency skills when they arrive. So it's really important that they have a plan in place. But for some of your organizations, it might not be the top priority. It might be something that you've learned you need to do because your community has diversified. Exodus made another point to say that following a language access plan will help them succeed their own vision as an organization. So please feel free to tie in that mission of your own DEI initiatives into the plan. It strengthens the plan and it strengthens the strategy on the other side. Let's see. Again, I just spoke about this. It supports their mission as an organization. The next sort of section is where you define the exact services that you want to provide. And that's where you can kind of do an assessment about the resources you have and what's reasonable for you. Exodus provides a wide variety of services, and they had to identify sort of which ones, and for them it was really all of them, okay, that they wanted to do translation, on-site interpretation, all of it, phone translation. But your programs, you might want to identify 1 or 2 key programs that that you want to make more accessible. You're not going to be able to do it all at once, but you eventually will. But in your plan, you're going to identify the key services that are important for you to provide access to. So only you know how to answer that question. You can see that Exodus went ahead and listed many of its programs. All right, so most of us have been through a needs assessment, and really a language access plan is like that. Needs assessments are so powerful because they determine the need for the program, and usually funders want to see the problem that needs to be fixed or solved. And so with that in mind, the issue here is that you want to assess whether the community out there matches the community that you're actually serving, right? So the needs assessment is really a demographic a demographic dive to see, okay, who's out there in my community, and then an internal data drive to see who is coming through our doors, who is calling us, who is signing up for our programs. And then you sort of do a comparison and think, are we even close? Do we have any Burmese people, for example, engaging in our programs? Do we have any deaf, hard of hearing individuals participating in our programs? We know the percentage of them are out there, but are they coming through our doors? And so that's where you want to identify the target populations that you want to serve. For Exodus or for the Immigrant Welcome Center, those people, Tiffany, this is a good, important question. Where can people research their language demographics in their area? I think it's a good time to jump in there and help you answer that question. So I am going to jump over to a really great website that you can all go to. It's not hard to find. It might be hard for me to find on my screen, but I think I find it. Do you see a website called lepgov?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so write that one down. lep.gov is an incredible resource for everyone. And it's gotten so much better over the years. It's a government resource, which will have a lot of information on language access planning. So if I've whet your palate, but not given you quite enough, you can go to this website and really get more specific guides, understand how to procure language services, what standards you should be looking for, tips on how to do it. Really relevant to our conversation today is language data. So this is one of the most powerful tools that you have, because they have a language map app is what they call. And keep in mind, it's from the census. The census data, as you know, is quite limited. We know it's not adequately reaching all of our multilingual populations. We are well aware of that. However, it's very important if we can meet those minimum standards, knowing that they're lower than they probably are reported. So I pulled up Marion County. I'll show you how to do that. There's two ways. You can literally have sort of like a point and click on this map where you can go into Ohio and pull up a certain county's just big picture population of that total LEP. If you want to get into more specifics, which I would encourage you to do, there's another way to access the map where I went ahead and selected Indiana, and then I went to say Madison County. You can pick any county, and then it will spell out not only your total population of LEP, but every language and the amount of people that identified speaking that language. So it becomes a really good tool for you to use, and it can get down to the zip code level, but county by county is really where it's most powerful. To get data on the deaf and hard of hearing, it's more difficult. And what I do is I reference people to our state agency that collects that data. And I would do the same. I would contact your local state agency and ask them for that data, because it's sometimes harder to find, unfortunately, and it is not included on this website. So remember to seek that out. And if you need more information on that, I can help you with that. And yeah, let's see that this will be updated soon with our new census data. I'm not sure if it will. So keep this website in mind, lep.gov. What I also want to do is, while I'm here, is to show you a tool that once you identify those top languages, it's really easy for you to create a point to your language guide for people that walk through your door. Now, this is only really works for people that are literate, and they are not all literate. But it's a great tool to have in mind, especially if you have something like a phone service in place. Let's jump back because we only have a few more minutes, and I want to just jump back to the actual plan. Now that you know where you can get your data, and go ahead and stick that in your needs assessment. You'll have the stakeholders of your plan in place. You'll quantify the individuals that need language assistance. And you'll see here, Exodus went ahead and determined their LEP population using the census data, okay? And they also went in and looked at the cultural data of their staff. So that's your internal census. And I really, people sometimes are shy to ask their staff about that. Don't be shy. It's a big part of most of their lives and their culture. So if they speak more languages, let them let you know. They'll let you know how proficient they are. Use them carefully. Graham mentioned that he's been asked to do translations and he knows when he's in over his head. It's appropriate to maybe ask someone to just orient someone in their language if you have them on staff about your general services. But if someone comes in for like a mental health session, for example, obviously that's a place to use a professional interpreter. What I'd like to encourage you to do, because we're almost out of time, is that as you start to look at this data, it's a great time to put practices and expectations in place to collect data on who your program participants are and what languages they speak. The idea is that you can see that grow and your trends increasing over time. You can show your funders, hey, we're not doing great yet on reaching, say, the Burmese population, but our goal is to have 5% of our participants from speaking those languages participate, and you'll be able to demonstrate that. So really, really go ahead and do that. I'm going to put in the chat box a little cheat sheet. There we go. That you can just copy and put right in your plan. And let's see, I want to share it with everyone. There we go. This is what Exodus used, and you can just kind of use that, copy it and put it on, and you would put in your own languages. You'd put in and your own expectations of time. It might be a 2-year plan. It might be a 5-year plan. That's all about the resources you have on hand. We are just running out of time, but in your guide, you'll see that your language services is part of your plan. That's where a company like Luna would come in, where we could help with a phone interpreting service, with document translation. You could identify that in the plan, and you could get really specific about it. You know, we're going to translate just our homepage and our intake forms on our website during year 1. But by year 3, we want, half of our website to be in 3 languages. So again, this is a tool you can use for funders. You can see that Exodus just did that. It said with additional funding, they're going to get an after-hours multilingual phone tree, pre-recorded messages in top 5 languages. So these are the kind of creative plans you can make. the last element, and then I'll stop talking, is that don't forget your vital documents. You were given a cheat sheet, if you will, of a list of vital documents, and only you know what those documents are, but it's a great place to start. If you're looking at a place to start, it's something like a phone service and then some most important documents. The other elements of, and we'll send that out if you haven't received it yet. And the other elements of the language access plan, like notice and training, those really come later. And you can read about that in your guide. But these are the key parts that I want you to focus on. If you have questions, reach out to me. And Graham is also available just to even speak for experience, someone who's been through this process. And you have us both available as resources. Let me go ahead and get our emails up for you. So I'm Marina at luna360.com, and it's Graham Melendez at immigrantwelcomecenter.org, all caps. I wanted to thank you all so much for coming. I know that we didn't have enough time to get as deep as we could, but I hope you have a good sense of what a language plan is, what it can do as an asset for your organization, how it can help reach your diversity and equity goals, and help your community thrive. So thank you, Graham, for hosting. And special thanks to Tiffany Hansen, my colleague, who helped put this together. Thank you, all of you. And I see that some of you are engaging in the chat. We'll capture that. Thank you to Becca for interpreting today, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye, Graham.
Bye, Mari.